Richard, what do you think you're doing here? Miss Nancy, I didn't butt in. It was the client's request. We have no choice but to comply. One day, our company received a massive deal worth over $70 million. Seeing this as a chance for promotion, the manager tried to handle the presentation almost single-handedly to hog all the credit. However, her poor presentation skills greatly annoyed the client. Just as the deal was about to fall through, for some reason, the client's CEO turned to me and said, "I'd love for you to do the presentation." Despite my perfect recovery, the manager remained suspicious of me. At that moment, the client's CEO began to speak about my past achievements, and the manager turned pale upon learning the truth. I am Richard Johnson. I'm a 45-year-old salesman working for a mid-sized general trading company. I started working here when I switched jobs in my late 30s, making this my 7th year at the company. Over these 7 years, I have consistently completed my assigned tasks, without making any significant mistakes that would cause losses for the company. However, I've never stood out either, so I remain a regular employee. At 45, being a regular salesperson at a mid-sized trading company, it's easy to be seen as a typical unremarkable middle-aged office worker. In fact, I am that unremarkable office worker who gets scolded daily about work by my manager, Miss Nancy. Miss Nancy is the 33-year-old female sales manager. Nancy is an in-house employee who joined the company right after graduating from college. She has been with the company for 11 years and has already risen to the rank of manager, known within the company as a rising star. With strong ambition, she boasts that she will become a division head within a few years and join the executive team by her 40s. Naturally, achieving high performance is essential for her to climb the corporate ladder further. Therefore, Nancy meticulously checks the work handled by her subordinates and demands even the slightest increase in sales and profits. Right now, she's pointing out details about the documents I've arranged with an apparel manufacturer. Richard, about the contract with that apparel manufacturer? Yes, we managed to settle the sales contract as initially estimated. A contract at the initial estimated amount. How can you stay so calm about that? Sigh. Nancy's expression hardened. Perhaps my response sounded too nonchalant. With an exaggerated sigh, she displayed the report I submitted just before leaving work yesterday on her tablet and thrust it towards me. You signed the contract with the numbers from the initial meeting. How much time did you spend on this contract? Instantly, I recalled the past few months' calendar in my head and answered. The initial inquiry came 46 days ago. The first face-to-face meeting was 42 days ago. We signed the contract the day before yesterday, so it took exactly 40 days. Subtracting holidays, it was 28 working days. You can tell that just by looking at a calendar. Although I thought I had answered her question accurately, it seemed to irritate Nancy even more, and she began criticizing me loudly. I could feel the eyes of the sales floor staff turning toward me and the manager. However, those gazes quickly turned away within a few seconds. Scenes of me getting scolded by Nancy were not uncommon on this floor, and I could sense the other employees' expressions of exasperation, as if saying, "Here we go again." Or poor Richard. In short, almost a month and a half. According to your unnecessarily precise memory, you took 28 working days to finalize the negotiation. And how come the result matches the initial estimate exactly? Usually, the numbers fluctuate more, and your job is to make them go up. Well, during the process of nailing down the details, we realized that sales projections were shrinking. So I used our own sales channels to expand sales, thinking I managed to maintain the numbers without dropping them. It's easy to say anything with words. The problem is that despite using our own channels to expand sales, the numbers only stayed the same. Sigh. Every time you're told something, you just sigh and sigh without understanding a thing I say. I nearly sighed again but managed to stop myself at the last second. It's not that I'm mindlessly responding with sigh. It's a habit from way back. A sort of verbal tic that comes out when I'm trying to thoroughly consider what the other person is saying. Seeing me fall silent, Nancy sighed dramatically and said, "Is it really that hard for a perpetual underling to understand even basic guidance? Given that the client is operating based on these numbers, the first batch can't be helped, but for the next batch, make sure to add on some extra, even if it's a small amount. This isn't a goal to aim for, it's a mandatory requirement." Yes. Nancy seemed somewhat satisfied, either because I managed to respond with something other than a sigh, or because she had vented her emotions by berating me. She turned her back on me and walked away. Nancy didn't forget to mutter "incompetent middle-aged man" loudly enough for me to hear as she walked away. As I was finally freed, I felt the light sympathy from the surrounding colleagues' gazes. For me, being sarcastically criticized by Nancy is like a daily ritual, so I quickly returned to my desk to finish today's work. A few hours later, just after the end of day chime rang, I got up, clocked out, and left the floor. As luck would have it, I bumped into Nancy in the hallway. She glared at me and sarcastically said, "The punctual aristocrat is leaving right on time again today. How nice for you." As usual, I greeted and said, "Excuse me," then stepped outside the office. As I began walking towards the station, Chris, a young salesman who joined the company 2 years ago, called out from behind me, "Richard, may I walk with you to the station?" Chris, leaving on time today, that's rare. I've been working overtime continuously until last week, so I try to leave early when I can. In our department, there's an odd atmosphere that makes it hard to leave on time. So as a newbie, I feel awkward leaving earlier than my seniors. If you've finished your tasks, leaving on time is perfectly normal. It's your time. There's no law that says you have to sacrifice it for the company. Richard, you're always so calm. I even saw you boldly say goodbye to Nancy earlier. Actually, I overheard her being sarcastic to you in the hallway and quickly ducked into the restroom to avoid her. I only came out once she passed. So you located the enemy and avoided conflict. Well done. I replied jokingly, and Chris relaxed, letting out a light laugh. Other seniors do similar things when they see Nancy. She can turn a necessary 1-minute instruction into a 5 or 10-minute lecture full of sarcasm. Well, she's someone who feels a strong responsibility to improve performance. That probably leads to her excessive lecturing. Richard, you're too tolerant. How can you handle such an abusive boss with such maturity? It's not about being tolerant. If I waste energy getting annoyed with the manager, I won't have any left for work. I just go with the flow. I think reaching that state of mind is impressive. You were criticized harshly today for the contract with the apparel manufacturer, right? What the manager said is true. I signed the contract for the initial estimate without any additional gains. Actually, I heard the details directly from the manufacturer's representative. They underestimated their projections and requested to start with half the initial amount. You managed to maintain the initial estimate by quickly incorporating our sales channels. Chris, did you know the representative? Yes, since our department started carrying their products. I've had direct conversations with them. We're about the same age, so we ended up chatting, and I heard about you off the record. It's funny how stories spread from unexpected places. Well, it's not something I was hiding. So it's true. You managed to maintain the contract amount despite the initial reduction. That's the same as increasing sales. Why didn't you tell Nancy? She only looks at the final numbers. Saying we restored the reduced amount wouldn't satisfy her. She'd probably ask why I didn't increase it further. Yes, that sounds like her. She only cares about the results and openly says our struggles don't matter. Yet she reports the contract as her achievement to the higher-ups. It's only natural to account for it as the department's sales. Even so, she decorates the documents to make it seem like all her work. People say she got her current position that way. Well, aiming for a promotion and working hard isn't a bad thing. Organizations need people with the drive to lead the way. I can't do the same, but I somewhat understand her feelings. Richard, you worked for another trading company before coming here, right? Yes. Have you experienced fierce promotion races? I've always thought that you handle any task efficiently and quickly. It doesn't stand out because you do it so naturally. But now that I'm in my second year, your efficiency seems extraordinary. You're overestimating me. I just plan my work so I can leave on time every day. If a task looks like it will take too long, I avoid it from the start. So, my numbers always meet expectations but don't exceed them, which makes me a target for the manager. Just being able to plan and leave on time is impressive. It's normal for external factors to disrupt schedules, yet you always adjust and leave on time without falling behind. That's quite something. What position did you hold at your previous company? Just as Chris started asking about my past, we arrived at the station. Our homes are in different directions, so we part ways here. I pretended not to hear Chris's question and said goodbye, heading towards my platform. I decided long ago not to talk much about my past before joining this company. It's not that I have anything to hide. However, if more people learn about my past, I might not be able to maintain my current lifestyle. All I want now is to keep my position, ensuring I can leave work on time every day. For me, Nancy taking credit for my work or her constant unreasonable scolding are trivial matters. When I got home, my daughter greeted me at the door. My daughter, now in middle school, has recently taken an interest in cooking. She seems to be learning about ingredients and seasoning techniques while helping my wife. I made today's main dish. Did you? I'm looking forward to it. When I entered the living room, my wife greeted me from a chair in the kitchen. Welcome back, dear. I'm home. You seem much better today. Yes, I'll get dinner ready right away. With that, my wife slowly stood up and, supporting herself on the table, made her way to the cupboard. My daughter quickly ran to her side to help with the dishes. After confirming that my wife was moving steadily without wobbling, I went to my room to take off my suit. This is why I insist on coming home on time. In my younger years, I joined one of the top trading companies in Japan and achieved outstanding results, unmatched by anyone. In my third year, I was selected by the higher-ups and assigned to a newly established consulting division. This consulting division aimed to work closely with the management of client companies, facing critical issues to improve their performance. Handling major projects that included vital confidential information for clients was not uncommon, and I felt the tension of being on a battlefield every day without exaggeration. No task was easy. Some were so challenging that if mishandled, they could worsen the client's performance or even lead to bankruptcy. In that consulting division, I literally forgot to eat and sleep, fully immersed in work, achieving numerous successes. Due to the high confidentiality of the information I handled, my existence was mostly unknown. Only the top management of my company and my direct superior knew about my work, apart from the client executives I met face to face. I worked in that department until my mid-30s, leaving an impeccable track record. I tackled extremely challenging tasks with full effort, weaving solutions from the slightest possibilities and running around to realize them. This job, tough but immensely satisfying when successful, felt like my calling. So when Chris said my work was efficient, it was only natural. My current job is extremely easy, and no matter what irregularities arise, they are less than ripples compared to what I handled before. Delays in work were impossible. Therefore, despite my efforts to avoid standing out, Chris's observation of my efficiency should be commended. When I was consulting, I decided to work as long as my stamina allowed, often returning home only a few days each month. I was already married with a daughter, but my wife fully understood my job and supported me, taking complete care of the household. One day, I received news that my wife had collapsed from an illness. Rushing to the hospital, I saw my wife unconscious in a bed surrounded by medical equipment. Without thinking, I tried to cling to her but was stopped by a nurse who sternly warned me not to move her. I learned for the first time that my wife's body was deeply ravaged by illness. Thanks to the treatment, my wife regained consciousness, but her physical functions did not immediately recover. Our young daughter wanted to be held by her mother, but until her strength returned, that was not possible. Holding my daughter, who was crying for her mother's warmth, I felt my own helplessness. Gradually, my wife's condition improved, and after rehabilitation, she could hold our daughter and live at home again. Now, she has recovered to the point where she can walk slowly. However, it took a long time for her to return home, and our daughter was 10 years old by then. Finally home, my wife held our daughter, crying and promising never to leave her again. That scene crushed me completely. Celebrated as a legendary consultant and fully absorbed in thinking only about client companies, I had let my wife's illness progress unnoticed. Although her illness was acute and might have manifested even if I had been nearby, my constant absence meant I missed early warning signs that could have led to earlier treatment. Early treatment could have hastened her recovery, reducing the time our daughter was deprived of her mother, and perhaps my wife would have regained more freedom of movement. All this happened because I neglected my family for work. My wife, determined not to hinder my work, endured her fatigue and managed the household and our daughter's upbringing alone, maintaining everything for my return. Knowing my feelings, my wife and grown daughter sometimes tell me the illness was to blame, not you. But even their kindness felt like too much for me, and I swore to devote the rest of my life to my family. Shortly after my wife was hospitalized, I left the demanding consulting division. Both the higher-ups and clients strongly urged me to stay, even begging me to return whenever my situation improved. But I politely declined all their requests. Even if my wife fully recovered and became healthy enough to run a marathon, I had no intention of returning to my previous work-centric lifestyle. Since then, I found even the slightest bit of overtime unbearable. As soon as the workday ends, I head straight home to check on my wife's condition and spend time with my daughter. This is my sole purpose for living. However, in a major trading company, even outside the consulting division, all departments are busy, and overtime is the norm, making my requests unacceptable. Without hesitation, I quit my job, contacted clients, and sought a position with the lowest title and salary, as long as I could leave on time. Eventually, I was introduced to my current company, made the switch, and have been here ever since. During my consulting days, I earned a high salary, so I knew that even with a lower salary, I could still support my family. With that in mind, I chose to forego overtime pay, finish my workday on time, and devote all non-work hours to my family. That doesn't mean I take my current job lightly. I work diligently during the day without holding back. However, I never participate in client entertainments after hours, nor do I work overtime to get ahead of schedule. For the past 7 years, I have not done a single second of overtime, nor have I missed using all my paid leave to spend time with my family. Since I complete my assigned tasks flawlessly, the company has no grounds to reprimand me. However, to a boss like Nancy, who demands excessive results, I must seem like an incompetent who does only enough work to justify his salary. I used to feel a thrill from achieving results and being recognized, so I don't entirely dismiss Nancy's way of living. My only resolution is to prioritize my family, no matter how much pressure Nancy puts on me. Despite maintaining a calm demeanor at work, the atmosphere in our company has been quite excited recently. The reason was a large-scale project worth around $70 million from a major company that has seen significant growth in recent years. Unlike a large trading company, $70 million is a substantial amount for our company, and securing this deal would greatly improve this year's performance. As expected, Manager Nancy quickly expressed her desire to lead this project to the CEO. Securing this deal could accelerate Nancy's promotion, potentially making her a director before she turns 40. Even those who usually viewed Nancy's strong ambition with cold eyes wanted to get involved in this project. I didn't look down on such people as promotion-obsessed. I used to have tens or hundreds of times their ambition and foolishly failed to protect my wife, which I now bitterly regret. While maintaining my usual work pace, focusing only on the task at hand, I was suddenly called by the CEO. I wasn't particularly surprised to be called by the CEO. I just thought about how to make up for the time taken from my regular work hours as I headed to the CEO's office. In the CEO's office, besides the CEO, was manager Nancy with a sullen expression. "Richard, I'd like you to join the large-scale project. What do you think?" "The $70 million project. Why me?" "Mr. President, if I may, Richard has no significant achievements and shouldn't be assigned to such an important project." "Nancy, we discussed this. Richard has experience with large projects from his previous company. He can handle this calmly without getting too involved." "Sigh. You will still lead the project, Nancy. Richard will provide calm support. There's no reason to oppose this." Reluctantly, Nancy accepted the decision, but she cast me a scornful look filled with intense emotion. As if to say, "Get in my way and you'll pay." I thought for a few seconds and asked, "I can't work overtime, but is that acceptable?" Nancy looked at me in disbelief, but the CEO agreed, so I had no choice but to accept. I've decided to prioritize my family, but once committed, I intend to perform my duties perfectly. As I gathered and organized materials for the client presentation, I scrutinized the client's business and identified their needs, even those not explicitly stated. Initially, Nancy treated the materials I submitted as if they were a nuisance. However, as she read through them, she realized that highlighting my points could significantly improve client evaluations. By the end, she was intensely absorbed in the materials. When the end-of-day chime rang, I left without hearing Nancy's evaluation of the materials. However, the next day, Nancy said nothing about my materials. At the company meeting, Nancy, who chaired the session, explained her presentation plan to everyone. I expected her to include the plan I submitted the previous day, but to my surprise, Nancy completely ignored my plan. Even if Nancy had incorporated my plan and presented it as her own idea, I had no intention of protesting. If my work, unnoticed, improved the presentation and the company's performance, it would be my way of repaying the company for keeping me on without overtime. So, I couldn't help but feel disappointed that Nancy completely ignored my proposal. For Nancy, it was probably humiliating to take credit from someone she deemed incompetent. She was likely trying to protect her fragile pride by completely crushing my proposal. Her decision to lower the success rate of the presentation for the sake of her ego disgusted me. But I didn't stand up and confront her with, "Why are you ignoring my proposal?" I had long abandoned the spirit of a business warrior and didn't want to jeopardize my current position by clashing with Nancy. The meeting attendees also sensed that Nancy's presentation was ordinary and didn't create an optimistic atmosphere. However, no one strongly opposed it, so Nancy successfully pushed through her plan. If this presentation succeeded, Nancy would take almost all the credit. Having experience with deals of this scale, I felt a bit uneasy. For smaller deals, the plan might work, but for this amount, the client's demands would become significantly stricter. I still intended to support Nancy as much as possible during the presentation, but I wasn't entirely confident that alone would guarantee success. The day of the presentation arrived. Accompanying Nancy, who was impeccably dressed for the occasion, I carried a laptop with the presentation data and various product samples to the client's office. However, as soon as we finished setting up in the conference room, Nancy ordered me to leave. "I understand that you will be leading the presentation, but I think it would be beneficial for me to stay and quickly provide related materials for unexpected questions." "You still don't get it. Just having someone as incompetent as you around taints the atmosphere. I only expected you to carry the items and set up. Now that it's done, wait outside. That's an order. Fearing that Nancy might raise her voice even in front of the client, I quietly complied, despite my doubts about her plan. I thought that Nancy had practiced enough for this big stage, and that my absence wouldn't cause significant issues. With no waiting room available, I reluctantly sat on a sofa in the hallway outside the conference room, waiting for Nancy to finish the presentation. As the start time approached, employees from the client's department began passing by, followed by a clearly senior group of executives. I greeted to each of them as they passed. Most of them gave a slight nod or glanced at me before moving on, but the last person stopped in front of me. I could only see their shoes, which looked expensive, suggesting they were likely an executive. Not wanting to be rude, I greeted. The person stood in front of me for a few seconds before a secretary urged them that it was time, and they headed into the conference room. Raising my head, I saw the back of the departing person and felt a vague sense of recognition. But they entered the conference room before I could confirm if they were someone I knew. The presentation was scheduled for 45 minutes, followed by 45 minutes for Q&A, making for a total of an hour and a half. However, less than 20 minutes after the presentation began, the conference room door opened, and a few people stepped out. Inside the conference room, it was apparent from the commotion and the number of people speaking that something unusual had occurred. I had a bad feeling, but as it was an internal matter for the client, I couldn't just barge in. I could only peer down the hallway toward the conference room. A young man who had come out of the conference room approached me. "Excuse me, are you Richard?" "Yes, I'm Richard, but..." "The CEO would like to speak with you directly. Could you please conduct the presentation?" I took a couple of seconds to respond. "Understood." The chaotic atmosphere inside the conference room and the young man's restrained but tense expression were both familiar to me from what I once considered a battleground. Although the details were unclear, it was highly likely that something unexpected and unfavorable for our company had occurred in the conference room. And instead of Nancy, the client's CEO specifically called for me. In such situations, saying something like, "I don't have the authority," is only harmful, as I knew all too well. In that moment, I regained some of the mental state I had when I was in the consulting division. When I entered the conference room with the young man, I saw Nancy standing frozen in front of a large screen displaying the presentation materials, her face pale. The stern faces of the executives made it clear that Nancy's presentation had gone poorly, and they had stopped it early. "Richard, I'd like you to take over this presentation." The elderly man who spoke to me was the same person who had stopped in front of me in the hallway earlier, recognizable by his suit pattern. Seeing his face for the first time, I understood why I had been called in. "We've already consumed nearly 20 minutes of the presentation time. I won't be able to cover everything from the beginning, so I'll summarize the key points." As I responded smoothly to the CEO, Nancy snapped at me. "Richard, what are you doing here?" "Miss Nancy, it was their request, not my initiative. We have no choice but to comply." Nancy was stunned into silence by my uncharacteristically firm attitude. "Miss Nancy, your presentation is sufficient for explaining known facts, but we didn't gather here to hear generalities. We want to start new operations quickly and need to know how to achieve that. Your proposal includes things we could do alone without partnering with a trading company. We expect to see benefits like economies of scale or significant time savings that we can't achieve on our own." The CEO's words made the executives nod in agreement. As I feared, Nancy's safe but uninspired presentation wasn't effective at this level of negotiation. "But I have other ideas. We don't need to replace me with this incompetent employee." Who is competent or incompetent is not a fixed evaluation. Even I risk being branded an incompetent manager if I fail. What's important is how one performs right now, not what their past evaluations were. I would appreciate it if you refrained from running this meeting based on your personal impressions. The CEO's straightforward words left Nancy visibly defeated, and she withdrew in silence. Without looking at her, I proceeded with the presentation plan that Nancy had tried to suppress. Since I had created all the materials myself, I selected the necessary ones from Nancy's arrangement, compressed the key points, and conveyed them within the limited time. I covered the content initially planned for 45 minutes in less than 20 minutes. Since it was all my own work, handling it quickly was easy for me. Still, I felt a familiar rush that I hadn't experienced in a long time. And a slight confident smile, reminiscent of my past, appeared on my face. That confident expression, it was stronger before, but it's definitely you, Richard. No, CEO. The last time we met, you were the division manager, right? I was sure you'd rise even higher, but I didn't expect you to become the CEO. As the CEO and I spoke warmly, Nancy watched us with a puzzled expression. One of the executives asked, CEO, do you have a prior relationship with Richard? Yes, more than just a relationship. Richard is like a savior to me. When I was the division manager, our company faced a series of scandals. Our market share plummeted due to overseas competition, and we were on the verge of being split up. The executives reacted as if they knew about that period, but none seemed to recognize me. My division was in the most danger. Back then, the CEO and I secretly requested Richard's crisis consulting. Following his plan, we reorganized the business, quickly regained trust, and avoided being split up. Our company grew rapidly from that point, and I was promoted to CEO. Due to my involvement in many confidential projects, only a few clients knew my face and name. One of those clients, now standing before me, was the CEO. That's why he was surprised to see me greeting in the hallway before the meeting and paused for a while. If there had been a bit more time, the CEO would have surely called out to me. Richard, who are you? Why did you hide your past and join us? As long as someone as talented as him is working in a less prominent position, there must be a reason. But unless he chooses to talk about it, it's not for us to pry. I nodded to show my gratitude for the CEO's consideration, regardless of Richard's personal circumstances. As his superior for years, not recognizing his abilities and even calling him incompetent in front of us. As someone who considers him a benefactor, I can't help but feel displeased. Nancy realized the magnitude of her blunder and stood there, pale-faced. Setting aside personal issues, the business deal was a great success. The executives, who had been unimpressed by Nancy's presentation, were impressed by mine and expressed their eagerness to proceed with the contract. The contract was almost finalized on the same day, and our company was thrilled. I wasn't expecting any praise or special rewards from the CEO. However, I did expect at least a word of acknowledgement. But instead, I heard rumors that Nancy was likely to be promoted to division manager. Nancy's ambition surpassed my expectations. Despite her disgraceful performance, she reported to the CEO that the deal succeeded due to her presentation. Normally, I should have exposed Nancy's lies. But at this point, I didn't care who took the credit. My plan reached the client, and even with Nancy at the helm, the work would proceed in the client's best interest. That alone was enough for me. However, the next day, I was called to the CEO's office again. When I entered, the CEO and Nancy were waiting for me, just like before. But unlike the day I was assigned to support Nancy, she looked visibly exhausted, sitting on the sofa in a sloppy manner with her face half buried in the backrest, even in front of the CEO. As I was distracted by Nancy's unseemly appearance, forgetting to greet the CEO, he spoke to me. I've been told that the success of the presentation is all thanks to you. Not entirely. The success is the result of everyone's efforts. As expected, Richard, you're humble, unlike this brazen Nancy. The CEO said, gesturing towards Nancy with a look of disdain. "May I ask what happened?" When I asked, the CEO briefly explained the events of the past few days. After the presentation, Nancy reported to the delighted CEO that she had led the entire presentation. She claimed credit for the plan I had devised, which impressed the client, and the CEO, not suspecting such a lie, was pleased and even hinted at promoting Nancy to division manager. However, such a blatant lie couldn't go unnoticed. The client's CEO, who knew about my past, directly told our CEO everything that had happened during the presentation, making him realize he had been deceived by Nancy. Embarrassed to be unaware of his company's internal affairs, the CEO angrily summoned Nancy, confronted her, and forced her to confess the truth. When all the lies were exposed, Nancy was severely reprimanded, and the shock of losing her promotion to division manager left her unable to stand. She collapsed onto the sofa. I couldn't help but feel some sympathy for Nancy. Despite everything, I still understood her ambition and desire for promotion, and pitied her for not finding any goal beyond climbing the corporate ladder. She likely had a mental breakdown during that presentation and lost her ability to make sound judgments. If she had quietly acknowledged her mistake, she might not have achieved her dream promotion, but she wouldn't have been completely ruined. The lie was too big to hide, but she couldn't resist the temptation to experience the promotion to division manager, even if temporarily. I didn't realize Nancy's mental state had deteriorated so much, and I couldn't stop her from deepening her own wounds. After losing all trust from the higher-ups, Nancy caused a commotion by screaming and running out of the company when demoted. She resigned the next day. As for me, the CEO asked me to take over as sales manager, which I initially declined. The reason should be obvious by now. However, the CEO, having heard about my past achievements from the client, insisted on giving me a responsible position and wouldn't take no for an answer. Ultimately, I accepted the promotion on the condition that I continue to leave on time. Most employees thought I was promoted due to covering for Nancy's critical mistakes during the presentation, which the higher-ups appreciated. Given the chaos from Nancy's sudden resignation, some saw me as a harmless choice, not aligned with any factions within the company, and suitable as an interim manager. I had no interest in how people gossiped about me. I continued to finish all my necessary work within regular hours, as I always had. Even though I suddenly became a manager, I continued to handle all my work within regular hours without any delay. Some employees were surprised, but I didn't attract excessive attention, and I was able to maintain the quiet life I desired. However, Chris, who had always been interested in my efficiency, seemed to become more convinced of something as he watched me handle the managerial role with ease. "Richard, you've had incredible experiences in the past, haven't you? You can't fool me into thinking you were just an average employee. Come on, just give me a hint." I won't tell anyone. Whenever our schedules overlapped, Chris would press me with questions like this. His attitude wasn't from a desire to uncover someone's secret, but rather a childlike curiosity, like wanting to know the trick behind a magic show. It didn't make me uncomfortable. Chris has a sharp eye for observing people's behavior. If nurtured, he could potentially take over my managerial role in the future. Recently, I've started thinking this way and have begun to secretly plan his development. Now that I am a manager, it wouldn't be a bad idea to take on the new challenge of identifying and nurturing the talents of my subordinates. While deftly handling Chris's persistent questions, these are the thoughts that have started to cross my mind.